in memory of Dick Robinson and sponsored by the Institute of Museum and Library Services.
Good afternoon. I'm Guy Lamolinar, and I'm from the Literary Initiatives Division of the Library of Congress. And I'm thrilled to be here today with Jerry Pinkney, who is the Caldecott-winning artist and writer of the new book, The Little Mermaid. Welcome, Jerry.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
So
My pleasure
to
be
with
here
us
for
today.
sure.
And I should say welcome back, because you've been to several of our book festivals, as have members of your family. So it's always a privilege and an honor to have you.
Yeah, and I'll tell you something. This is always very special to me, and I can't tell you how I look forward to just having a conversation with young readers for sure.
I'm looking forward to it too, and I'll tell our audience the premise for this event is I will start with the questions, but we're hoping we get many, many questions from our audience. So if you're in the audience, please start typing in your questions and we'll get to as many of them as we can. As I said, Jerry's new book is called The Little Mermaid, and it's based on a tale from 1837 by Hans Christian Andersen. And I'm wondering, Jerry, what made you want to retell this story? What did you think was there that could be for contemporary audiences today?
Well, I think one of the things I recognize with the fact that the hold on our imaginations over time, and the Little Mermaid sort of captured our imaginations, whether it was the mermaid herself, whether it was the idea of the undersea, but there was something that fired up my imagination. The other piece that was important at the time was I was looking for a project, the vehicle being the ocean. And I love painting water. And so there was a time when there was a search for finding that right project. And the mermaid had that pull, had that stretching of the imagination, had the challenge for me.
Mm-hmm. What is it about water that you love writing and illustrating about?
I mean, I think the whole idea of how do you capture water or wetness? How do you capture the variety of wildlife, of fish life within the oceans? How do you capture what happens to the imagination when you look out at sea from land? And it's that wonder, is that sense of perking the curiosity in oneself, that's the character of the Little Mermaid. It's sort of flipped itself, and she's looking at land from the underseas, the same way we look out at the ocean.
Okay, well, we've already started getting questions, so I'm going to ask one, and this is a great question from Alexis. Alexis wants to know, I believe I read somewhere that you've illustrated over 100 books. How do you continue to create art, and where do you pull inspiration from year after year?
Well, how do I continue to create art? First of all, it's a passion of mine to make pictures. It's also a way that I express myself. I can more easily express a thought or an idea, and certainly to share a story visually than it is verbally for me. And as far as where do I draw inspiration from? If you look at the body of work and over those, like say, 100 titles or so, what you'll see is this a sense of curiosity about forms and genres of literature. So there's fiction, there's nonfiction, there's poetry. There's this sense. So I draw my inspiration from the projects themselves, and that's why they vary. I work for children, I work for young adults, and I work for adults as well. So you see, that's the inspiration. The other thing that's important is that these projects offer me the opportunity to not only grow as an artist, but also to grow as a person.
Here's a question from somebody who's a longtime fan. Her name is Teresa, and she says, one of my favorite childhood memories is when you visited my New Jersey elementary school in 1989. I'm excited for
Wow.
the opportunity. I know. Do you remember that?
Yes.
She says, I'm excited for the opportunity for my children to hear from you today. How has your experience writing children's books changed since the beginning of your career?
Oh, what a beautiful question, Teresa. My first book was in 1964. And so how has it changed? I think it has changed, first of all, the draftsmanship. I've grown as an artist, but I also have a much deeper perspective on things, on subject, on time. So I think that you find that combination as you grow as an artist and you continually to improve your craft. That's one thing, but world itself, so that the message or the idea also changes and grows.
That sounds great. How would you say, when you illustrated The Little Mermaid, for example, how did you change it from the original story?
Well, there was there was this was problematic, I think, in so many ways. The original Hans Christian Andersen, in terms of its dark romanticism, there were elements in it that I felt were necessary to change. There were other elements that were not necessarily changes, but additions in a way.
Mhm.
And I needed to find a way to do that. So we have the Little Mermaid. She's a wanderer, a seeker. She has her share of curiosity.
Mhm.
I wanted that to be important. I didn't want the mermaid necessarily in search for a prince or a hero. But I wanted her to reach out and be curious, and in search of I guess a like-minded person. I
Mhm.
wanted her. She wants to experience the real world, the world of land, and I wanted her. So you see her search, first of all, is and to understand the bigger world of land and sea. But she's
Mhm.
also in search for a soulmate where she can share her imagination, her sense of curiosity, her sense of wonder about something other than the world that she knows. So that drove everything. I also wanted uh, to speak in a universal um, way, and you see that in the fact that my mermaid is of color, and I wanted to
Mhm.
also to speak to that, the universality of the mermaid story and the mermaid mythology.
Mhm.
Every country, every continent that may border on an ocean has a myth of the mermaid. So I
Mhm.
wanted to speak about that, and you see that in terms of what she sort of wears. The use of cowrie shells as a necklace and things like that.
Mhm.
I wanted to do that. So, and we started out with looking for a story that dealt with the underseas, and then the mermaid, and in this sense of making it universal. to making it all inclusive. And you can see it kept building as we got into it. And that was the magic for this story, was these sort of taking the inspiration from the Hans Christian Andersen Little Mermaid,
Mhm.
and then sort of fitting it so that it may have answers to the time that we live in.
Here's a question from Maria. She would like you to talk a bit about your research process, if you have one, and when you are writing and or illustrating.
My research process is very extensive. I mean, I have a library, and my wife and I both talk about, we quibble about how many, the number I say I have. Usually, I think I have over like 2,000 books in my library. In some areas, greater numbers than that you would find in a local library. And I have a lot on nature. So the research, and actually the research is part of my energy. We talk about inspiration. The research can provide the sort of fuel for inspiration. And so it's also how I come up with ideas. So if you take, for instance, you're dealing with the underseas, and then so you're looking at say books that research fish or the creatures that we find in the lower depths of the ocean. And then that can lead you to, okay, the environment. Because what about these creatures? And what about their safety? What about their stewardship, their care? So the research is also not only looking for something, but it's also finding things. Finding what you might want to use in the project itself. I love the book. I tend to go to the internet when I know I need something specific, but when I want to get a sense of place, of setting, it's the book that you hold in the hand and you go through it. And that's the magic for me. That's the energy.
Thank you. Here's another question that kind of relates to your work process from Steve. He would like to know, he says you've mentioned a lot about the fact that you work for a range of age groups. Do you tackle a project differently depending on the age you are writing or illustrating for?
I think what you find embedded in the text itself is you get a sense of who this is being directed towards. I mean, so that should happen. It's this magical sort of chemistry or connection between reading a story and seeing which age group might be of value. Now, there is in the picture book, it's a lot cleaner and clearer in a sense, in as much as the amount of text. But as we step up to older groups, it's there. There are clues that an artist, an illustrator looks for in the text that will guide you. So I'm always responding and to service of the text or the story itself.
Here's a story that kind of, our question that relates to the current book you've got out. It says, folk tales and classic stories seem to be a consistent inspiration over your career. What draws you, no pun intended, to illustrate these stories?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it comes from how and I grew up and the way stories were served to us as children. My mother loved Hans Christian Andersen. She loved the fables, Aesop fables, and you see that in my body of work. You also have, which is important, is this oral tradition of storytelling. And so then you have now the legend of John Henry, or the Uncle Remus tales, or so you and those, and I think that you talked about a question earlier about where do I draw for inspiration, it also comes from that. It comes from the experience of being delighted, to being entertained, to have the imagination stretched when I grew up. So I'm responding to all of that now. And you find that in all the projects that I do, I look for something that triggers an experience that I've had growing up that has stayed with me and been in that still is important for to me to draw on and to use. So the inspiration comes from so many different sources. But the idea is I love storytelling, visual storytelling.
That's clear from your work. And I have a question here from Teresa, who's asking on behalf of her daughter. She says, do you hide any secrets in your books that I can find?
I tend to, the earlier on, you will see that you might see faces, let's say in John Henry, in the sort of mountain or the rock formations. There are faces maybe hidden. If you look at some of my other stories, especially the folk tales, the more and more imaginative stories where it takes you into the fantastic, you will see that sort of echoed in my work. Yes, for sure.
Have you ever put a picture of yourself or a member of your family in your work?
But now I used my family and very earlier on as models, and they can all attest to me bringing them into the studio and finding a costume that they should wear. Yes, so you will find my children, my family, and myself, by the way.
That's good. You have to put yourself in there.
Oh, for sure. And sometimes I, and there was a time period where I would just put my camera on a timer, and no matter whether it was male or female, I would dress up in a costume and then push the timer and jump in front of the camera and take the picture. And it was sort of like acting and in many ways, and I would always get exactly what I wanted, of course.
Of course. Here's a question from Hannah. She wants to know if you identify with your characters in any way.
I try to. That's important. You want to get inside of the text and how the text speaks about a character, and then you want to inhabit that character. And so what you do is to see the expressions, even though, the text might allude to a sort of an expression. I oftentimes will act out that what I believe was the right expression for that mood at the time or that dialogue at the time. And I'll stand in front of a mirror and pretend this is true not only of the human figures that and the human characters, but also the animals. You can see that also in the Lion and the Mouse.
Right. I know you're coming to us from upstate. I'm sorry.
I said, who's the lion in The Lion and the Mouse?
Is it you?
Yes. I'm sorry. And you had a question from?
Yeah, I have a question from Robert. I know you're coming to us from upstate New York, but he would like to know, have you found any place in the US that you love to be and that inspires you to illustrate and write? Do you have a favorite place to write and draw?
Well, the writing, by the way, which is very interesting, of course, the drawing and the painting happens here within my studio. I
Mhm.
find that the writing can happen, and I think really the writers who write all the time can attest to this. Can happen anytime. Ideas can flood, and so notes. It's always great to have a pad or something you can write down ideas and things that should happen. Um, so so oftentimes it's within the break away from the drawing board that you also get ideas because you free your mind up. Um, as far as a place in the country, um, I, I think the West holds a certain magic. I think because of
Mhm.
the landscape being so dramatically different than you find sometimes on the East Coast, where we're pretty constant and consistent in our landscape. You go out west, and it's a whole nother another zone or world of mountains, of desert, of forests. So I love going west. I love driving across country because it holds so the majesty, the majestic quality of the mountains and forests. That just
Mhm.
inspired me to no end.
Okay, here's a question I must ask since I work for the Library of Congress and I get to work with librarians every day. This is from Maria. She's a children's librarian. She said, I'd love to ask if libraries influenced your childhood or writing career.
Um, I would let me answer the last part of that question first. The I live here in Westchester County, Croton on the Hudson, and I would say to you that out of the number of books that I've created since I've moved to Croton, they all have an imprint of the Croton Free Library. Uh, Earlier on, that's where all of my research was done. The librarians were absolutely amazing. And there was this sort of connection between what I was attempting to do and what I was working on and the books that you were surrounded with
Mhm.
um, in the library. And there was also this sense and I would do this oftentimes when I would get stuck, the ideas would be frozen. I would just get in the car, drive to the library, and you open that library door, you enter into the service desk, and they say, Jerry, how are you? What are you working on? And at that moment, everything that I've been thinking about has value.
That's
So
exactly
that
right.
is incredibly important and beautiful for me. Now, what was the first part of that question? The first that was I answered the maybe that's what I should do now. Answer the first part first, and then the second part.
I have to tell you, the question has disappeared and I don't see it anymore.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
I mean, no, that's okay. That's okay.
I'll ask you another question. Are there any kinds of common themes that you would say run through your books?
I think earlier on, this is very interesting. Early on, you see family running through threading its way into all the stories that I chose to take on. Um, and you will see, by the way, in the body of my work, the kind of projects that I commit to will reflect where I am at a given time. And what I mean by that is, as the country changes and my outlook changes, you will see. You know, again, it was family. There was a period of time where folk tales and fairy tales became important in terms of my work. Um, you will see at times when history takes over and you find, let's say, Minty or Black Cowboy Wild Horses. So what you do, if what you can do, if when you look at the body of my work, you can pretty much see where Jerry, the artist, was in terms of how he was seeing the world at a given time. And I think so you'll see that change. Now, right now, you'll see that the theme that runs through the work is about hope. It's about sharing. It's about companionship. It's about love. It's about the environment. Why? Why is that so? Because I'm also responding not only to the projects that, but also the times that I'm living in and that we're all sharing.
Can you tell us about whether you have any advice for aspiring writers and illustrators?
I think that uh, the words that come to mind is also the theme of The Little Mermaid. It's about uh, being true to oneself,
Mhm.
uh, to holding on to dreams. And by the way, the dreams and goals can be motivators to work in a certain direction or to make the effort that goes into any creative works or being yourself um, validated in a sense. So those are things. I mean, if you choose to be a writer, then read. If you choose the visual uh, storytelling, draw. But more than anything, and again, thinking about the Little Mermaid and being a seeker, um, that also listen to others, listens especially to others that might have succeeded within the area that you would like to you see yourself going in. Um, so draw as much as you can if you want to become an artist. Write as much as you can if you want to become a writer. Visit museums. Also be curious not only about what aspects or what things will help you along your journey to that becoming what you want to become, but also be conscious and aware of things that are around you because they feed who you are. And you want to invest in something that not only, as I said earlier, that you grow as a writer or as an artist, but you also want to grow as a human being.
Mhm.
And I think so my motivation is reaching out and touching people. I'm very fortunate that I can not only do that, but I can also reach out and touch young people um, and give them this kind of I don't know if they're words of advice or just things that my thoughts about how I have succeeded and how I value the work that I do.
I'm interested in that portrait behind you. Can you tell us who that is?
That's my great granddaughter, Zion. And I did this portrait when she was with us for 8 months. It came up for 2 weeks stay of winter break from school. And then we had, of course, the pandemic shut down. And so I created that image and also of my daughter who was living with us at the same time and my wife, Gloria Jean. So that's Zion.
She's beautiful.
Yes.
Here's a question from William. Are there any projects you've had to turn down that ended up being hugely successful and perhaps you regretted having turned it down?
I don't know if I want to go there, but it's okay. There was one that actually received a Caldecott medal, and I still think about that. Maybe I should have rethought it, but I actually went to the artist. I think that responded to a story in great spirit. So yeah, it became very successful. Yeah.
Do you have any closing words for us today? We're pretty much near the end.
No, I
Anything you'd like
mean,
to say
the
to
only
your
thing that
readers?
I thought about this, about your sort of theme for the open a book, open the world,
Mhm.
and I responded to that because, in a sense, that message is not only true for I think how one should go about their lives, but it's also true about the Little Mermaid, because that's her spirit. Be a seeker, be a wanderer. Keep your eyes and ears open. Um, that's what I try to do in my life, and I would love to pass that on, especially to young
Thank you.
children.
Thank you, Jerry. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. I wish we had more time, but unfortunately, we're at the end. And I want all our listeners to know we've been talking with the renowned Jerry Pinkney, the author, the illustrator of so many books for young people and adults and teens. And Jerry, thank you so much. And thank you for being part of the National Book
Thank you.
Festival. And to our audience, thank you for your wonderful questions. And please keep enjoying the festival at loc.gov/bookfest. Thank you.
Thank you very much.